Peace and elevation, family. It's your brother Mike X. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I ask you, family, to subscribe to my YouTube channel, to like this video, to take it upon yourself to share this message with those that you care about, with those that you want to invite into an enlightened, solution-based dialogue, where we don't focus on all that's wrong in the world, but we focus on the infinite number of possibilities that we are afforded as children of the Most High God, who, through the grace of love, offers us everything that we need to grow and thrive on this planet, even in the midst of the chaos and confusion that's being sown by those who want to rule through that chaos and confusion and division and ignorance that stops us from taking possession of our lives, from the positive spectrum. You know what I mean? So it's November 3rd, 2020. There's a couple of videos that I've done recently that I want to upload, so I'm not sure exactly when this video will reach you. It may be a week or so before I put this on YouTube. But anyway, I just wanted to address this video particularly to the so-called African American or Black American, and I want to talk about, the power of being able to vote, and how much can you get out of the power of being able to vote. And this is not going to be an anti-voting video, but I do want to point out some things. There are communities that live in America, and they don't focus so much on hinging all of their hopes on, voting for the lesser of two evils, or voting for anybody for that matter. These communities, they focus on using their distinct race, ethnicity, and culture to unite around, to come together around. They build positive cultures. A culture is based upon your habits and your customs. And usually your culture is supposed to empower your particular racial, ethnic group. It's supposed to allow you to find common ground around, your common race or your common ethnicity, or even your common geographic place of origin, or your common present place of, geographic placement, where you actually live. This is my neighborhood. This is my part of town. We all live in this part of town, so we're all going to come together to support one another, to build business and commerce, to control the social habits and customs, the cultural habits and customs. And we're going to, this is our spot, and we're going to make sure that this spot has, a particular way that it's run and it's kept that helps us to be strong, that helps us to, take care of our food, clothing, shelter, our need for security, to provide safety for the people who live here, particularly the children and the elders, and you have other racial, ethnic groups that thrive in the American system. And they're not so focused on, again, hoping and wishing that they'll be able to elect somebody who's going to be like a paternalistic, godfather who's going to look out for their interests. No, they know that through unity, through social cohesion and coming together, that gives them political power. It gives them economic power. It gives them the ability to run and control their own neighborhood, through, again, business and commerce, creating businesses, creating schools, taking ownership of real estate, so their people have a place to live. Their people have a place to work. Their people have a place to be taught and educated, and to thrive. And some of these places are called Chinatown. Some of these places are called Little Italy. Some of these places are called, Little Korea. You have the Jewish neighborhoods, and to my knowledge, these people are not running around, like I said, so caught up on hoping and wishing, again, that they're going to be able to elect someone to look out for their interests. They look out for their own interests. The people who live in those communities as individuals, they feel it is their responsibility to act in a certain way, in a positive, supportive way of the culture and the race and the ethnicity that they are a part of. They find great pride in being amongst a distinct racial, ethnic, cultural group. And I said, I mentioned Chinatowns, I mentioned Little Koreas, I mentioned Little Italies, and I mentioned the Jewish communities. But the sons and daughters of Africa, so to speak, of all the sons and daughters of Africa who have been displaced through the European powers of France, of England, of Spain, of Portugal, when you go back and you start reading and studying, of the European efforts to conquer the world and the colonies that were created all across this planet, and how the sons and daughters of Africa had their history and their knowledge of God and their knowledge of themselves and their great cultures stolen from them, to disconnect us from our past greatness, and how we've been colonized and enslaved and taken all over this planet, and we don't know ourselves. So a lot of us, we're speaking English today, we're speaking Spanish today, we're speaking French today, or some form of French, some form of English, some form of Spanish, and other, vocabularies, that are not our own. And because we don't know ourselves, and because, it's hard for us to value ourselves or have confidence in ourselves and faith in ourselves. And of all the sons and daughters of Africa, it is the so-called African American or Black American who finds him and herself lowest on the totem pole, who doesn't really have what some of the other sons and daughters of Africa who have come to America, whether they be Jamaican, whether they be West Indian, whether they be Haitian, whether they be Africans from the motherland, whether they be amongst our Latino or Latina communities, and a lot of people don't really know that some of our Spanish-speaking, darker hue brothers and sisters are actually African, or at least they come, their roots is in Africa, and some of them are way darker than me, but a lot of them have been brainwashed to a degree where they don't associate themselves with Mother Africa, and they don't associate themselves with the other sons and daughters of Mother Africa, and some of them, they haven't gone through the slave making process to the degree and to the extent that black people or Africans in America or African Americans have gone through, you know? And their unique culture or ethnicity as a Spanish-speaking group, as a French-speaking group, you know, has allowed them to keep some form of pride and confidence and dignity, you know, to where in America they've carved out little enclaves in you know, amongst the townships and neighborhoods that they bend to their ethnic, cultural, social will, you know. So you have parts of the neighborhood sometimes, man, where you have our Jamaican brothers and sisters. You know, they have pride, they have dignity, they have self-respect in being Jamaican. You know, they're not necessarily thinking about that, you know, they come from the same root that other ethnic cultural groups, such as Black Americans, such as West Indians, or, you know, whatever. You know, they're thinking more so about their culture of being Jamaican, you know. The same thing can be said for some of our brothers and sisters who call themselves West Indian, you know. The same thing can be said for some of our brothers and sisters who call themselves Puerto Rican or Dominican, you know, or who call themselves, you know, they come from different countries and cultures within the motherland itself, you know, and they come over here with a purpose. And their purpose is to take advantage of what America is supposed to offer to you, the land of the free and the home of the brave, you know, because they have a strong racial, cultural love and affinity for one another. They're able to unite and use their unity to take over, you know, specific parts of town and open up their own businesses and take care of the people who live in their ethnic cultural group, whether they be Jamaican, whether they be, again, West Indian or Haitian. The so-called African American is who I'm really speaking to, but other racial ethnic groups, you know, Black or African racial ethnic groups can learn a lesson from what I'm saying. The sons and daughters of Africa who were enslaved here and who have had their family bonds and ties ripped apart, you know, who have been put to death at times if they try to raise themselves up out of the enslavement or being disempowered or being dependent upon the system of racial, you know, white supremacy, white skin privilege, you know, racism, you know, which has produced foremost in the so-called African American or the Black American a state of dependency or inferiority. And a lot of people come over, you know, and wonder what's up with the so-called African American or the Black American. Why can't they get their acts together? They don't know and understand that there has been a constant bombardment, you know, of injustice, of racism, of lynching, of the killing and maligning of our leadership. So that we, you know, and it's been constant. Every time there's an awakening, every time there's an effort, you know, to begin to bring some type of order and peace and love in the communities where the Black American, African American has lived, you know, over, you know, decades. Every time there's a movement or something that goes on where there's a call for unity, of coming together, there has always been a backlash, coming from those, from governmental agencies, and also coming from, other, white collectively, the white communities, where they don't find it in their best interests to see Black Americans, to become liberated, to become organized, to begin to love themselves, and to begin to have some faith and some confidence in themselves, that they can take ownership of their own communities and run those communities for the best of ourselves, the way we see those who have the Chinatowns and who have the Little Italys and the Korean towns and, the Jewish communities. And even sometimes, like I said, the Jamaican communities or enclaves, or West Indian towns and enclaves, and they've bought into the propaganda, looking upon the Black American, the African American, as a savage, as a self-hating group of people that hate themselves so much that they can't get their act together. To where a lot of our own brothers and sisters of darker hue feel like, yo, I don't want to relate to and connect with the so-called African American or Black American. I've seen in the news, I've heard in the music, I've seen in the movies that this is a group that has never wanted better for itself. That's not about anything but robbing and stealing and killing themselves. So if they're about only robbing and stealing and killing themselves, then imagine what they would do to me. And so you have a lot of people who have bought into the hype or into the propaganda, into the propaganda. And they don't want nothing to do with the so-called Black American or African American, but to maybe make some money off of the African American or Black American. And this isn't only, what, the so-called white collective, business people, private and municipal, so to speak, who see the Black American only as someone to take advantage of economically and politically. But it's also other racial ethnic groups, again, Chinese, Korean, some, Italian, Jewish, and again, sometimes Jamaican and West Indian and Haitian. And our brothers and sisters from the motherland itself, a lot of times they see the Black/African community only as a come up, They don't know how to feed and clothe and shelter themselves. They don't know how to organize themselves to be able to establish their own businesses and commerce, to establish their own schools, to buy and maintain their own real estate, So I'll be their landlord. I'll be the shopkeeper, who makes money off of them. I'll open up the liquor store. I'll open up, the corner markets, what we call bodegas here in New York City. I'll open up the supermarkets, And it's not a lot of times because it's something that's done, from a sense of compassion and empathy. But it's like, nah, I could get rich, very rich, selling them things that they haven't shown any ability to establish for themselves, the way we have. And it's not just because we are just a bad luck, self-hating, broken down people that we haven't been able to establish ourselves socially, economically, politically, the way other groups have. But again, like I said, there's been a constant bombardment, man, of physical, mental, emotional attacks to keep us trapped in the lower passions and addictions and dependencies of the lower flesh, to stop us from being able to raise our own standards through doing the knowledge, seeking knowledge, wisdom, understanding, truth, using the power of truth, using the power of our ability to learn, to raise our standards, to come up out of the dependency and the passions and the savage animalistic nature of the flesh, minus a strong intelligence and awareness, by learning and knowing that you can take control over your life as an individual, and you can begin to strategize and plan and work with other people to make powerful things happen. Yes, there is power in unity. If you're able to get on the same page and you're able to work out contracts and habits and customs of supporting one another racially, on ethnically, culturally, the people who share your race, your ethnicity, your culture, and who share, we all live in the same neighborhood. We all live on the same block. We all live in the same part of town. So because of this, the way we see other races and other ethnicities carve out the Chinatowns, the Little Italies, the Little Koreas, in the Jewish neighborhoods where they control their own politics, they control their economics, they band together socially to stand up against any outside invader who may be trying to come up in that community to start trouble. We're supposed to be able to do the same thing. And focusing on doing that and is more powerful than depending upon, again, some lesser of two evils, to be a paternalistic, godfather, who'll break off some crumbs if you act, the way they want you to act, or they'll keep on promising you something that they never deliver on, and they know that you're so desperate from your lack of power, from your lack of empowerment, that you'll continue to go for the promises as long as you stay in that dependent state. So I want to say to the so-called African Americans, being lowest on the totem pole in America, having no social unity and love for self, so that we can learn how to support one another, appreciate one another, respect one another, love on one another. First, love on ourselves as individuals, and have value in ourselves as individuals, to know that we were not created to live on our knees and to be begging someone to do for us what we all have the inherent power to do for ourselves, the same way other racial, ethnic groups take for granted. We have the same abilities or even greater abilities. We just have amnesia. We've just been separated from our knowledge of ourselves again, to know that we have been great in the past. And when you don't believe and don't see any forms of greatness that looks like you, a lot of times you feel like there is no greatness that can come out of you, So I just wanted to say, and nobody should have a problem. Nobody who's interested in peace and harmony on this planet, who's interested in moving away from, racial animosity, you know, economic dominance of other cultures. You know, some of the racial ethnic groups that I mentioned, they would never allow another racial ethnic group to come up in their Chinatown, in their Little Italy, in their Korea town, you know, in the Jewish communities and take over the business and commerce, particularly. They would never allow someone to come in with alien customs, social customs, to disturb their ability to have peace and harmony in their neighborhoods. They would never allow it to happen. And I tell you, you know, there's a lot of people who feel like, yo, I'm not racist. You know, I believe, you know, I'm not against anyone, you know. But there are a lot of people who are racist. And some of them, I believe, you know, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They may not even know it. You know, they have been taught a superiority of their customs and their beliefs for so long that they don't know that they have a narcissistic self-love for their race, for their ethnicity and their culture, to where, and they're used to other people looking on them as if they are the best. And they're so used to it that when they see a racial ethnic group such as Black Americans or African Americans begin to pull away from worshiping them as if they are God's agents on this earth, as if they are the best thing since sliced bread, you know, like they are the cream, you know, of the crop. When we begin to love ourselves, those people who are used to the worship and the adulation, they can't handle it. They lose their minds, you know. How dare you reject me? How dare you reject our supremacy? You know, this is when, you know, you start to see that even some of the most liberal, you know, groups that feel like, yo, I'm a good person. I want what's best for everyone. But then when you see these people want for themselves what you take for granted, you see the fangs, the claws of racism, of racial animosities begin to come out. How dare you reject me? You know, Black Lives Matter. What about all lives matter? You know, this whole country, you know, the politics, the economics, the social customs, everything has affirmed the power, the superiority of whiteness. So you don't need nobody to affirm that your lives matter. On the other hand, Black people who have been beaten down into the mud pits, you know, who have been lynched, who have been assassinated, who have been locked away in your prisons, who bear the stigma of savage, who bear the stigma of criminals, of thugs, that walk around with the burden of self-hatred of themselves as individuals and self-hatred of anyone who looks and reminds them of how messed up their lives are. Those are the people who need to have, you know, their belief in themselves affirmed. You know, they need to be, you know, have movements of Black pride. You know, Black is beautiful. They need to be reminded that they come from a great and mighty and proud people. They have to have their self-worth, their dignity affirmed, because this country has done all that it can to keep them in a savage, dependent mind state. You know? So, having said all of this, I'm not going to go too much longer. I'm coming up on 30 minutes. But I ask you again, you know, to subscribe to this video, to share this video, to use this video as a conversation starter, you know, with those who you love, with your children, you know, with your husband, with your wife, your significant other. The Black American, the African American has to begin to develop self-love, self-care for the life that they have as individuals and for our ability to begin to work with one another. Minus envy, minus jealousy, you know, minus fear that somebody might outshine you. If I support this person, he gonna outshine me, you know. So I'd rather continue to support everybody but another black person. We gotta stop doing that, man. So having said that, I hope to talk with you soon. Peace and elevation.